Hello and welcome to BYJU'S Exam Prep IAS. Welcome to our daily Hindu analysis. Before we begin, let me remind you to like the video, to share your comments, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. So let's get started with the analysis of today's The Hindu newspaper by looking at an editorial from page number 8 of the Delhi edition. This article examines the significance of the quadrilateral grouping, and it suggests that the Quad has the ability to reshape the global world order by enabling the formation of new economic alliances and by setting up a new regional security architecture. But before we begin with this analysis, first let's talk about a few basic facts about Quad along with its background. See, the Quad or the quadrilateral is an informal diplomatic grouping between four countries, that is the United States, India, Australia, and Japan. These four like-minded democracies have come together to form the Quad, which is exclusively focused on a critical region, that is the Indo-Pacific region. Today, the Indo-Pacific region has emerged as the hub of global geopolitics and the global economy, because this region is home to nearly 3 billion people, and some of the most populous countries like India, China, and Indonesia are located over here. It's not just the large population of the region which makes it so significant, but this region has also emerged as the hub of the global economy today, as some of the major economic powers like US, China, Japan, India, and Australia, they all constitute an integral part of the Indo-Pacific. This region also includes 6 members of the G20, and it generates about 40% of the global wealth. Nearly two-thirds of the global shipping traffic passes through the Indo-Pacific, thereby clearly making it the economic and geopolitical hub of the world. The region also accounts for large-scale greenhouse gas emissions, which symbolizes the extent of industrial activity that goes on in the Indo-Pacific. And hence the region is not only vulnerable for global warming and climate change, but the region is also very vulnerable to a variety of disasters, thus making it a very sensitive region from an ecological point of view. So it's only natural that the strategic profile of the Indo-Pacific has grown over the years, and the major powers of the region have invested significantly in expanding and strengthening their military influence in the Indo-Pacific. The constituent states of the Indo-Pacific, such as US, China, India, Japan, and Australia, they all have a significant defense budget, and they have all built up significant military capabilities in order to project their military and geopolitical influence across the Indo-Pacific. These major military and economic powers are looking to protect their strategic interests, along with protecting their economic interests, and as well as the key shipping lanes that traverse across the Indo-Pacific region. But the competing strategic and economic interests of these countries has placed China on one side and the rest of the other powers on the other side of this geopolitical strategic conflict. So as China rose to economic and military significance in the region from early 2000, China has been displaying a lot of military aggression, particularly in the South China Sea and the East China Sea, in order to enhance its territorial maritime claims. And this has brought China into a direct confrontation with all the other major countries here, including India, Japan, US, Australia, and of course, the ASEAN countries, which are involved in a direct maritime conflict with China in the Southeast Asia region. So over the last 2 decades, as China got more aggressive, and as it started threatening the maritime boundaries of other countries through the exercise of its military power, it led the four like-minded democracies to come together under an informal grouping known as the Quad to counterbalance the rising aggression of China. In fact, the idea of such a grouping between India, US, Japan, and Australia dates back to 2004, when the Indian Ocean region was hit by a devastating tsunami. During this disaster, the navies of India, Japan, Australia, and US had collaborated together in search and rescue operations as part of their HADR assistance, or humanitarian assistance and disaster relief, that they were offering to the affected countries in the region. Following this, the then Prime Minister of Japan, Shinzo Abe, proposed the idea of a quadrilateral security dialogue between these four like-minded democracies, which had major interests and stakes in the Indo-Pacific. By this time, tensions had started rising between China and Japan over maritime disputes in the East China Sea, and China had already started getting aggressive about its maritime disputes, thus pushing Japan to envision a free and open Indo-Pacific. This proposal by Japan led India to elevate the Malabar naval exercise, which until then was just a bilateral naval exercise with the United States. And India ended up inviting Australia, Japan, and even Singapore to take part in the 2007 edition of the Malabar exercise, which essentially became a multilateral exercise focused on maritime security in the Indo-Pacific. But this initiative of India, along with these like-minded countries, invited an angry response from China, following which the Malabar naval exercise was again downgraded back to a bilateral exercise involving just India and the US. Then over the next one decade, that is between 2007 and 2017, China kept increasing its military aggression, especially in the South China Sea. And as it unilaterally started altering the status quo, and as it started challenging the international rules-based order, China started blatantly violating international law, including the provisions of UN Clause or the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, which led to the disruption of freedom of navigation and freedom of overflight in the Indo-Pacific region. So as China started flexing its military muscle, it led India, Japan, Australia, and US to come back together and to revive the quadrilateral from 2017 onwards, in order to counter the rising aggression of China and to enforce the rules-based order. Following this, the Quad was officially set up as an informal diplomatic grouping of these four countries. And over the years, India has brought back Japan and Australia into the Malabar exercise. And today, the Malabar naval exercise has more or less become the military arm of the Quad. But just when China started criticizing the Quad as a military alliance targeted against it, India ensured that the Quad was not just limited as a military grouping or a strategic grouping, but very quickly the Quad diversified into several other sectors as well, especially after the breakout of the COVID-19 pandemic. As the pandemic was threatening the economic stability of the world, and as it was destabilizing the healthcare systems in the Indo-Pacific, the Quad countries came together to collaborate so that they could jointly tackle the pandemic, and they even announced a Quad vaccine partnership. Under this initiative, India, Japan, Australia, and US, they have pooled their resources together to strengthen vaccine production and vaccine supplies in the region. And following this, the Quad has even started focusing on other critical sectors and areas, including infrastructure development, cybersecurity, space cooperation, people-to-people relations and cultural relations, critical and emerging technologies, and as well as climate action and disaster management. So this brings us to the recent summit of the Quad that was held in Japan just a few days back, during which the leaders of the four Quad countries focused on the Russia-Ukraine war, the COVID-19 pandemic, and especially on the China factor in the Indo-Pacific. See, the Russian invasion of Ukraine and the impact of the pandemic has dealt a severe blow to the global economy, because global supply chains have been disrupted, and the threat of rising inflation and lack of employment has created a significant economic challenge for the world. So in this context, the Quad countries have agreed to step up their economic cooperation in order to form new economic alliances, and they have announced a landmark initiative known as the Indo-Pacific Economic Forum. Through this platform, the Quad members will work with the other countries of the Indo-Pacific to promote trade and investment, with the intention of countering China's economic dominance in the region. As China is leading and dominating the region through its Belt and Road Initiative and the RCEP Free Trade Agreement, the Quad members are looking to counter this Chinese dominance by pushing forward the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework. The China factor in the Indo-Pacific was the focal point of discussions during the recent Quad summit, because the threat posed by China to the rules-based order is threatening stability in the Indo-Pacific. And on this question, all the four members were on the same page. On the other hand, they couldn't find a common ground with regard to the Russia-Ukraine war, because in this regard, US and Japan, they have been openly critical of Russia, and they have even targeted Russia with economic sanctions. Whereas India and Australia, on the other hand, have largely stayed away from directly condemning Russia as they have bigger interests to protect with Russia. But despite these differences amongst the Quad members over Russia, they have clearly presented a united front over the question of China. Even as China refers to the Quad as the Asian NATO, the Quad countries have gone ahead to reiterate their support for maintaining the free and open nature of the Indo-Pacific as per international rules and laws codified under the UN clause or the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea. They have condemned China's attempts to disrupt freedom of navigation and overflight because this is a guaranteed fundamental right under the UN clause, and ships and aircraft have a basic right to navigate and to pass through international waters and international airspace, respectively. But China has blatantly disrupted freedom of navigation and overflight, especially in the South China Sea and East China Sea, through its coercive attempts, where it is seen to be taking provocative and unilateral actions to change the status quo with regard to maritime disputes with Vietnam, Indonesia, Philippines, Japan, and the others. To further strengthen its claims, China has even resorted to militarization of these disputes, and it blatantly uses its military power to violate the sovereignty and territorial claims of other countries. It has even made many clandestine secret attempts to enhance its claims solely through military aggression. So, this is where the Quad members can make a difference and they can establish a new regional security architecture, thereby enable a new world order that could act as a counterbalance to China's aggression. Next, we have a related article on page number 15, according to which India and Japan are going to work together to help Sri Lanka during its economic crisis. Over the last few decades, India and Japan have been major investors in Sri Lanka, and as the country is facing its gravest economic crisis and humanitarian crisis, India and Japan have decided to come together to assist Sri Lanka in order to stabilize the economic situation and the humanitarian situation. See, earlier, India and Japan were collaborating in Sri Lanka under their Asia-Africa Growth Corridor Initiative, which was designed to counter China's Belt and Road Initiative. Under this, India and Japan were looking to jointly develop the East Container Terminal at the Colombo port. But once the Rajpaksa brothers came back to power, they had resumed their pro-China policy, and last year the Rajpaksa government ejected India and Japan out of the East Container Terminal project. Along with this, Japan was also removed from another key project, through which Japan was looking to invest around $1.5 billion in Sri Lanka to execute a light rail project in the country. But then, as the Sri Lankan economic crisis started escalating, the Rajpaksa government finally made a shift in policy and started approaching India for help. Over the last few months, India has extended close to $3.5 billion in assistance in the form of currency swap arrangements, line of credits, and loan deferment. This Indian assistance has been more or less matched by China as well. And this continuing influence of China in Sri Lanka has led the Quad countries, especially Japan, to join hands with India to jointly extend assistance to Sri Lanka and to stabilize the region. Then, coming to the third topic, we have a very interesting article on the text and context page of the online edition of the Hindu, which explains the reasons behind the global chip shortage and how it is affecting various industries, leading to an economic and strategic disruption. I'm sure many of you would know that the world is facing a critical shortage of chips, that is, semiconductor chips, which has had a huge disruptive impact on the electronics industry and as well as on the automotive industry. So, first, let's understand the reasons behind this shortage and then evaluate its impact and the hurdles associated with overcoming this shortage. See, the chip shortage being faced around the world is nothing new because the production, supply, and distribution of microchips and semiconductor chips never caught up with the rising demand for computing that came up along with rapid advances in technology. See, chip production is an intensive process with regard to the technology that is required, the resources and raw materials that are required, and especially with regard to the infrastructure that is needed. If you look at the global supply chain for chip production and distribution, It is widely distributed across the Western Hemisphere and the Eastern Hemisphere. While research and development and few processes are concentrated in North America, especially in the United States, much of the production is actually concentrated in the Indo-Pacific, especially in hubs such as China, Taiwan, few Southeast Asian countries, etc. These chips that are produced are widely consumed by countries around the world and by sectors around the world. But as China emerged as a strong manufacturing hub, it quickly gained a dominant position in the global supply chain as far as the production, distribution, and supply of semiconductor chips are concerned. A few disruptive events over the last 3 to 4 years have turned the global chip supply chain upside down and has led to a long lasting impact on the global economy. And since microchips also find application in several strategic sectors, such as electronics, communication, defense, etc., it has ended up having strategic and geopolitical implications as well. The shortage has become so severe over the last few months that semiconductor chip prices have shot up exponentially, as you can see in this graph, which depicts the PHLX semiconductor index. This shortage and rise in prices has affected multiple industries, and the biggest impact of it has been borne by the electronics industry and the automobile industry. So, in this context, it's important to analyze the reasons, that is, the factors responsible for the supply crunch, and how these disruptive events have affected the economy, along with disrupting the strategic and geopolitical balance. See, the recent large scale shortage in microchips was initiated by the COVID-19 pandemic and the lockdowns that followed around the world. As most offices around the world shifted to work from home, and as education went online, the demand for laptops and mobile phones and electronic devices went up exponentially and led to a sudden surge in demand for microchips. Along with this, the lockdown restrictions affected the availability of labor and as well as the availability of key raw materials, especially in key production centers such as China and Taiwan. This immediately disrupted the entire supply chain, starting right from production to distribution to consumption. Along with this, there have been other complex factors that have emerged in the last couple of years that has entirely disrupted the semiconductor industry and the supply chains. With the advent of new and emerging technologies like 5G networks and expanding cloud services, and wider adoption of artificial intelligence based services, the demand for chips also went up. And along with the existing labor shortage, Taiwan witnessed a major disruption because of a severe drought which affected water supply, which is crucial for chip production. Along with this, the trade war between US and China, initiated by former President Donald Trump, and the imposition of American sanctions against China further put enormous stress on the supply chains. And now the Russia Ukraine war has also dealt a severe blow to the semiconductor industry. The impact of this disruption was widespread because semiconductor chip production and wafer fabrication and design and development is widely distributed around the world, and it nearly involves 39 countries, along with 12 countries where the designing takes place, and around 25 countries where testing and manufacturing is done, and another 34 countries where other key processes are carried out. Studies have shown that before a microchip is actually sold to a consumer, it would have crossed at least 70 countries. And this clearly explains the interconnected nature of the semiconductor industry. It's because of this reason that the supply chain is so vulnerable for disruption due to any such external shock events. So, the only way to overcome the challenge and to ensure that it doesn't repeat again is to insulate the supply chains and to make them more resilient, along with significantly increasing production capacity. So, leading chip manufacturers such as Intel, Nvidia, and the others have already made significant expansion to their production facilities around the world. And the governments, on the other hand, are working together to make the supply chains more resilient to these shock events. According to estimates, the current chip shortage is expected to last till the end of 2023. So, until these challenges are overcome, The shortages are expected to last at least for a few more months. Then let's take a look at this column from page number 8, which deals with measles and rubella. The writers of the column are of the opinion that India can eliminate measles rubella through the right vaccination and healthcare strategies, and this target can be achieved by next year 2023. See, measles and rubella both are viral infections caused by an RNA virus, and they both spread through respiratory droplets, and as a result, they are contagious diseases. Measles mainly spreads through contact with infected mucus and saliva, and rubella, which primarily affects children and also pregnant women, happens to be relatively less contagious than measles. So while measles can be highly contagious, rubella is not as contagious as measles, and they both lead to serious symptoms that can last up to 5 to 10 days. Although both the diseases have some similar symptoms, the skin rashes and the red spots that are caused are slightly different in the case of measles and rubella. And even though both share similar characteristics, it's important to note that they are very distinct because rubella causes slightly milder infections than measles. But in the case of pregnant women, rubella can be dangerous as it can lead to severe birth defects. So, considering the impact of these diseases on children and pregnant women, it is important to focus on prevention and containment strategies. And thankfully, both the diseases can be prevented with the MMR vaccine. The MMR vaccine covers for measles, mumps, and rubella and is seen as a very effective containment strategy. So, with the adoption of vaccines and the right containment strategies, it is possible to eliminate both measles and rubella. This has been a top priority for the World Health Organization and as well as for the government of India. While India has come a long way in expanding its MMR vaccine coverage, it still has many miles to go before it can eliminate both the diseases. Hence, the writers are of the opinion that with the right strategies, India can achieve this target by July-August 2023. And hence, the writers suggest a few solutions to step up India's fight against these contagious diseases. See, when it comes to India's performance against these diseases, some states have performed well, whereas few states have been seen to be lagging behind. The poor performance of few states and few regions have been attributed by the writers to a few factors. They first question the vaccination strategy, as MMR vaccines are available for children in the age group of 5 to 15 years, whereas under the UIP program, that is under the Universal Immunization Program, the target age group is only those who are under 5 years. So this mismatch between MMR vaccination program and Universal Immunization Program has probably led to a failed strategy in some states. They also question why the rubella vaccine was administered separately in 2017, even when it was not on the UIP list. They also question the strategy of pushing children to get a second dose, and they point out a critical flaw in the vaccination drive, that healthcare facilities at the primary level should have been driving the vaccination program instead of schools, and this apparently could have also led to a mismatch in performance across the country. Earlier, the government had set a target of 2015 to eliminate measles and rubella, and after missing this target, the new target was set for 2020. So considering that India was falling behind, the government started accelerating the efforts, and as a result, India has seen tremendous progress over the last few years. But to complete the last mile, the writers suggest that the government should start focusing on healthcare facilities and healthcare centers and adopt a district-based approach instead of using schools as center for vaccination. If districts are made the nerve center of the vaccination drive, and if customized strategies are worked out at a district level, which can be implemented through the primary healthcare facilities, then India could quickly scale up the vaccination drive and achieve elimination by next year. Now let's take up an article from page number 12 that deals with the ongoing Naga peace process. But these talks have largely been stalled and they have hit a dead end because the NSCN IM in particular has demanded for a separate flag and a separate constitution in order to accept India's sovereignty over the Naga areas. These demands, however, have been found to be unacceptable by the Indian government and its negotiators. And as a result, the peace process has stalled over the last few years. So the article reports that NSCN IM is still as rigid as it was a few years ago. It is still insisting on a separate Naga flag as it symbolizes the Naga community and their unique political and cultural identity. The NSCN IM has also been insisting on a separate constitution and has stated that these two demands are non-negotiable. This rigid position adopted by NSCN IM has been found to be unacceptable by the centre, and thus the Naga peace process has been delayed for years together. But according to the article, the government is trying to push for a quick settlement in order to resolve this crisis and thus put an end to one of India's oldest insurgencies. Then coming to the last article on page number 1, according to this study conducted by the Asian Development Bank, India's GDP is likely to take a significant hit in the coming years as a result of learning losses that have been reported, especially during the pandemic, during which schools were closed, thus depriving access to learning and education for millions of children in the country. Data from UNESCO shows that schools in India were closed for nearly 82 weeks as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. And amongst the developing nations, India witnessed the highest amount of disruption to learning and education during the pandemic. So this disruption caused by the pandemic, along with the lack of access to quality education and the high expenditure involved in education, India is going to witness a significant learning loss in the coming years, which is going to have a direct impact on the skills of our workforce. And this in turn will affect production and as well as the income levels of the workforce. This in turn will translate into a significant GDP loss for the country. And the ADB report estimates that in 2023 itself, India is going to witness a loss of $10.5 billion in its GDP. And this number could rise to $99 billion by 2030. This will translate to a 3.2% reduction in India's GDP. And this will be a direct result of school closures and learning loss reported during the pandemic. Now let's take a look at a couple of mains practice questions. The first question: the Quad can help reshape economic alliances and regional security architecture. Critically analyze. The second question: how did the world reach to a point of global chip shortage? What are the hurdles associated with overcoming this shortage? Discuss with emphasis on its economic and strategic impact. Kindly write an answer to these questions and post your answers in the answer writing portal, for which the link has been given in the description box below. So with this, let's conclude our discussion for today. Thanks for watching.